is a graduate of UCD. She's a BA and MA from UCD, and she also has a Doctor of Philosophy from the University of Sussex. Her postgraduate research focused on funerary monuments from the mid-16th to the mid-17th century. And tonight she's going to talk to us about Thomas Dingley and the record that he left behind, and what we can learn from that. So she's going to focus a little bit on Carlow and what's in there from Carlow. So it dates to the early 1680s. Without further ado, Amy, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much for the invite to speak to you. I hope you can all hear me.
Yes.
Because there's nothing worse than talking away here and nobody being able to hear me. Anyway, just thank you very much for the invite, and tonight I'm going to speak to you about Thomas Dingley's Irish journal, in particular attention paid to his record of his visit to County Carlow. Very few accounts of Ireland of this period, or indeed the 17th century and 16th century, contain sketches. Hence, this is one of the main reasons why his journal is so well known. My interest in Dingley is because of the sketches of funerary monuments, which were both central to my master's degree and my DPhil. However, at the time, I didn't know anything about Dingley or why he visited Ireland. I'm currently working on a new edition of his manuscript for the Irish Manuscripts Commission. No date yet has been made for its publication, but it has been transcribed, but now the hard work has to begin preparing it for publication. The research so far for this edition has led me to discover much more about him, as this lecture will show. One noticeable aspect of his journal is that it's full of plagiarism, and I will refer to this again. Dingley's visit coincided when Ireland was at relative peace, brought about by the Restoration. He spent 12 months in Ireland, so he must have felt safe. Now, this is just an overview of my talk tonight. I'll be asking exploring who was Dingley, why did he visit Ireland, my own experience in using Dingley as a source for the study of Irish funerary monuments, his visit to Carlow, what he wrote and what he sketched. Apart from his sketches, Dingley is known for his observations. One of his better known and often quoted is his account of St. Patrick's Day celebrations, as you'll read here. His account shows the different ways Irish society celebrated it. Society and its class system were important to Dingley, but they're also very important at the time, and indeed during the 17th century, but it comes up time and time again in his work, when you're reading his journal, what the poor do and how the rich are in Irish society. Apart from his Irish journal, Thomas Dingley also composed other works, all of which were in manuscript form at the time of his death. Now, this is a list of his other works. The first one that we're aware of is his tour of the Low Countries, done around 1670 or 71. This manuscript is currently in private ownership. Dingley went to the Low Countries in the embassy of Sir George Downing, and the name Sir George Downing might ring a few bells with you because he was the man who went out, sought out and hunted down those that signed the death warrant of Charles I. He was over in the Low Countries trying to do some peacekeeping work to try to stop another Dutch war, and there were, I think, at least 3 in the 17th century. The next manuscript is Dingley's Tour of France, and this is bound with his Irish tour in the National Library of Ireland. The Irish tour was published by the Royal Society of Antiquaries in a series of articles in their journal between 1856 and 1913. The next manuscript by Dingley is his Welsh tour, dated to 1684. The original of this manuscript is in Badminton Hall, and it was given to the Duke of Beaufort, his patron, for his journey. And he actually went around Wales in the company of the Duke of Beaufort. This manuscript was published in 1864 and in 1888, and the latter publication in 1888 actually publishes the manuscript as it appears in a sort of the lithography type of print that they have at the time, and it is for sale on the internet at times, and it's well worth buying if you're interested in reading it. The next journal or next manuscript is a history from marble, which appears to be compiled between the 1670s and 1680s. The original of this is in the Bodleian Library. This was published in 2 volumes by the Camden Society, and you'll probably come across this a lot for sale on the internet. And again, it's well worth purchasing because it's done in the same way as the 1888 edition of his Welsh tour, and you feel as if you have you own the manuscript, and it's great to be able to read through this. The next manuscript we have is a book of poems and epitaphs, and this is in the Folger Library, Washington in DC, and this will feature later on in my talk, so that's why I've included it in this lecture. And then we have sketches probably done by Dingley, which are in the Dilwyn Church Register, which is in the Hereford Record Office. Apart from the RSAI publications of Dingley's journals, some of you may not know, but the original is available online. And this is where it can be found. This is the National Library website, and the Moore Institute in Galway have, as part of their Ireland Illustrated online portal, also have, I think, the majority of Dingley's sketches, which you can just, if you want to just look through his sketches, you feel free to do it, and I'd certainly encourage you to do that. Dingley's time in Ireland coincides with the Restoration period, and as he was an Englishman, and if you're interested in reading more about the society that he was born into and lived in, this book is particularly interesting. It's easy to read, and it tells you an awful lot about the social aspect of England and how people perceive themselves, and the general life, I suppose, in post-Reformation or post-Restoration England. So, who was Dingley? Well, this is a DIY family tree, which I've shortened because any of you who do family research will find out there are 2nd and 3rd marriages, so I've kept it short. But Dingley was born in Southampton, Hampshire. His precise date of birth is unknown, but it was probably in the early 1650s. I haven't yet found his precise date of birth. He was a gentleman by birth and was related to well-established families in the city of Southampton. Both his grandfather and father served as controllers of the port of Southampton. With researching family trees, sometimes you come across little bits of information about people which may or may not be of interest, but my own research discovered that his grandmother, Maria, was once accused of being a witch. Now, some of you might find this a bit strange, but around the time this sort of thing did happen. Now, no trial resulted from this accusation, and indeed herself and her husband appeared to have died more or less together in the same year. Might have been the result of the plague, but it certainly wasn't the result of being tried as a witch. Of interest, I suppose, not to labour the discovery of this piece of information, the reason for this accusation may have stemmed from an affair she is said to have had with a friend of her husband's. And this act is actually noted in the Southampton municipal records. And she was fined and she was ordered to keep away from him. And having visited Southampton and the area in which they used to live, this would have been very difficult because all these people live on top of each other, you know. But anyway, that was a point of interest. Dingley's grandmother outlived Dingley's father, who died in 1660. And in her will, she bequeathed land in Southampton City to Dingley. And perhaps it was under her auspices that Dingley left Southampton to be educated in London. Now, you'll see from this family tree here that the Hopton family also played a part in Dingley's family tree. And here we are, the family of Hopton. They were based in Canonfroom in Hereford. Now, there's a slight error in this family tree. Where did I put my thing? Here we are. They've put down Nicholas instead of Thomas. But again, to come back to class and marriage, particularly class and marriage, this lady here, who was his grand aunt, she was more or less told by an uncle to marry Richard because of an issue with the son that who was due to take over the family. He had an issue with him, so that was an arranged marriage. And then later in the same family, this man here, William Hopton, he was disinherited by his father because he fell in love with the wrong lady, and he's disinherited, and this caused a lot of problems for him. But I'm mentioning this because it just gives you an idea of how family and class played a part, and Dingley would have been aware of this. In London, Dingley was educated by James Shirley, the poet and playwright. He mentions this in his Dutch journal. That's how we know it. He mentions his schoolmaster. And while he was in Whitefriars, he may have met John Ogilvy, founder of the early Irish theatre, and who came to Ireland again in 1660. He was also in later life involved in the business of producing atlases. And I have a feeling that Dingley probably met him when John Ogilvy visited Shirley in London, because Shirley taught him Greek, and he went on then to do a translation of Ovid's Metamorphoses, which Dingley actually quotes in his in his journal. After leaving Shirley's school, Dingley went to Gray's Inn. The entrance age for Gray's Inn is 17 years, where he was recorded in its admission book in 1670, and this is where he studied law. Dingley appears to have practiced law as he was still signing himself as of Gray's Inn up to 1683, and this is mentioned in his Fulgur MS, which I mentioned earlier on. This part of his life warrants further investigation, so I hope maybe to do this at some stage. The very fact that his will was deposited in Doctors' Commons, where a lot of legal wills were left, shows that he was still practicing law up to when he died in 1695. Now, Thomond-Williamson connection. This is where I'm talking about how he perhaps met the Thomond family. We know in 1678, Dingley joined the army as a cornet in the Dragoons of Sir John Talbot. He didn't see battle as his regiment was disbanded. However, it shows that he was prepared to play his role in a very unsettled time, and in fact, the whole of the 17th century was full of wars of one type or another. So he figured, I'll volunteer, but he didn't see battle. However, the fact that he held this post appears to have been important to him, as will be shown later. His brief army career, I had originally thought, may have brought him into contact with the O'Brien Thomonds. In particular, the 7th Earl of Thomond's son, Lord Henry Ibracken, who was also a soldier, but would be far more senior than Dingley in the military. Henry O'Brien, Lord Ibracken, in contrast to his father, did visit Ireland and served as MP for County Clare between 1661 and 1666. It is Ibracken who may have been in the throes of reorganising his family's estates when he died suddenly in 1678 as a result of camp fever. This slide shows the 7th Earl of Thomond, who never came to Ireland. He was born and bred in England, and this is his tomb in Great Billing in Northamptonshire. Ibracken's widow, Catherine Stewart, married 3 months after his death as Sir Joseph Williamson. He was a diplomat and a senior politician in the government in Whitehall. There was much disquiet about this marriage, and it wasn't to do with the terms of timing, but also socially. Catherine Stewart was related to the King Charles II, and there were, again, the class issue. However, the marriage survived, continued on to both their deaths. He was charged with dealing with her debts in Ireland and England, and he managed them very well. And I'm beginning to, after researching Williamson, I believe that he is the person who employed Dingley. Dingley is very likely, if this is the case, was introduced to him by Sir John Talbot, who was the captain of Dingley's dragoon, as both men were members of the recently established Royal Society in London. Williamson also had an interest in antiquities and heraldry, which would further suggest this to be the case. Now, we're going back to the reason, we're getting down to brass tacks now. The reason for the visit, for Dingley's visit to Ireland, this is better understood against the background of surveying. The O'Brien Thomonds had a series of surveys done of their lands centred around their key castle of Bunratty. As you see here, Henry Ellsworth mapped Ennis in 1634, Richard Ball sketched Bunratty in 1637, and William Sapperton surveyed lands around Bunratty in 1637. By 1680, there had been an interlude of 43 years, and Ireland had endured the socio-political fallout of the 1641 rebellion, as well as the Cromwellian conquest. The year 1681 saw the commencement of two surveys, one by Thomas Speight, while the other was done by another Thomas Dingley. Now, here is Thomas Speight. His survey survives, and its main function was to record the rentals of the entire Thomond O'Brien estates, which stretched from North County Dublin through to Carlow, Clare and Limerick. It comprises of names of tenants and their associated leasing arrangements. Many leases hadn't been renewed since the 1650s, with the original tenants, most of them Cromwellian settlers, still in undisturbed possession. And just to give you an idea, this is actually from the original which was sent over to me. So just give you an idea of how it was laid out. It gives you an impression of first day at school, everything nicely laid out, and that unfortunately wasn't going to continue. As you can imagine, Speight being over here and Thomond being over in Northampton, he realised in due course that he had a free rein over here. So the other survey is Thomas Dingley's. The survey is possibly best described as a choreographical survey of the Thomond O'Brien lands, and this is best described as a regional survey, which it is, of the Thomond lands. Inquiry using a variety of sources. He uses previous traveller accounts and Sandy's travels and other sources that he comes across. Collection of facts, stories, objects. Dingley collects many tales that he's told. Detailed description and or measurement. He's consistently mentions distances, measurements as you're reading through his manuscript. The listing of notable features, well, we know from his sketches, castles, tombs, miscellaneous buildings. Visualization in a variety of formats. Well, you've got the different perspectives of, say, of Carlow Castle, if it is Carlow Castle, which I believe it is, and you've got other one or two buildings down in Limerick that he uses from two different perspectives. The use of historiography. Well, this is where Dingley takes on the plagiaristic role, I suppose, in the sense that he has transcribed the entire book by Edmund Borlase of the reduction of Ireland. He also quotes large sections of the Peccata Hibernia, and there are other smaller pieces from other manuscripts which he uses throughout the manuscript to aid his discussions. So there's a lot of plagiarism, but that does not take away from what he did. The last one, communication of results through presentation and or publication. Well, Dingley would have prepared this as a manuscript to be presented to his patron, like he did with his Welsh tour. In tandem with Spate's survey, so Dingley's is differed to that undertaken by Spate. The fact that I've mentioned plagiarism, Dingley wasn't the only person to write an account of Ireland that actually would be considered, would be in the same kind of vein. Thomas Denton in 1684 visited Dublin. He does something similar, and later on, John Dunton also does a certain amount of plagiarism in his work. Just to give you an example of a quote, a smaller quote that Dingley uses in his manuscript is during his conversation with the Mr. Moore on the banks of the river in Carlow. I was reading this piece and I was trying to figure out, this is very odd, where did this come from? And it turns out it's actually a quote from The Complete Angler by Isaac Walton. And Dingley uses this at times, again in his journal, but he uses it to sort of, when he's talking at the river with Mr. Moore, so he uses it to sort of enhance, I suppose, his recording of meeting Mr. Moore and to recreate, I suppose, them sitting down at the river, and that's why I believe he didn't just throw it in for any reasons. A lot of thought involved. Dingley also, my own reason for using Dingley is through his work on funerary monuments. And this is another quote from his journal that is also cited in a few publications. And it records his fear of the destruction of funerary monuments. And this actual quote is based on a similar one that's by John Weaver in his book Ancient Funeral Monuments. So he's sort of basing it on somebody else's, but again, he wants to, he feels the same way, and that is why he's using it as a quote. I'm just, the following slides are just going to show you why I believe Dingley is a fantastic source for recording funeral monuments for the 17th century and the late 16th century, mostly 17th century. This is a funeral monument of the infant son of Sir Arthur Chichester that was formerly in Christchurch Cathedral, Dublin. And you can see Dingley's drawing here. And this other drawing is from the Monumental Blane, which is in the Chief Herald's office in Dublin. They were very interested in heraldry, but as you can see, this one, they weren't too interested in the heraldry, they were more interested in the monument. This is a very unusual monument, and maybe that was one of the reasons why they sketched it. I know Dingley's is slightly different, a cheeky cherub, whatever, but you can see his sketch is quite concise, and more importantly, he includes the memorial inscription, which the other one doesn't. Another memorial which still exists, which Dingley also sketched, is the Agard Monument, 1584, in Christchurch Cathedral as well. You can see it has the heraldic top or crown has gone, but again you can see Dingley has been more or less, he's correct. Now this sketch it looks as if he probably didn't have much time, and that's the reason why some of his sketches some are better than others. And another example of perhaps one that's not fantastic, but at least it captures an idea of what the monument looked like. This is Luke Challoner, one of the founders of Trinity College Dublin, and this is the memorial that Dingley saw. It has been described by other visitors, but nobody sketched it. And this, unfortunately, is the effigy now. It's out, it's down in the basement in Trinity College. It became very weathered when the chapel that it once it was housed in was rebuilt, and it was left out in the weather. Another aspect of Dingley's journal is that he records inscriptions, and sometimes he doesn't have time to do the actual sketch. So here you have the inscription of the monument, and there you have the Monumental Blane, have the sketch of the monument. So it's good for recreating monuments at times. And my last slide regarding monuments is this monument, which was formerly in Emily in Cathedral in County Tipperary. As you can see, it was a very large monument originally, judging on the pieces that survive. And these are 2 pieces that survive that are built into the wall. Of interest, Dingley records the names of the sculptors, Patrick Kieran and Nicholas Cowley. And that's why one of the main reasons why this, I know the story is very, not particularly great, but the information that it contains is very interesting. Now, finally we're on to Carlow. So, on leaving Dublin in the original manuscript, Dingley arrives finally in territory owned by Thomond, and the main reason for his visit has begun. Carlow is described is a fair, thriving town commanded by a castle, which is garrisoned by a very ancient but experienced soldier, Sir John de Vallier. Richard Powell, Gent, is his lieutenant. The town has 2 rivers, the Barrow and Burn, 2 fair bridges, and it's often referred to as the Irish Montpellier. The Earl of Thomond, obviously he wants to say he's fantastic, is one of the best landlords of this kingdom. He likes town's buildings thanks to the industry and diligence of Thomas Spate. Now, this Thomas Spate is likely the father of the Thomas Spate that was involved in the other survey, and William Crutchley. The former has built the fairest inn adjoining 4 roads. Mr. Crutchley, formerly a miller and now High Sheriff, built a large stone bridge over the burn, which survived until 1827. Dingley describes the economy of Carlow, its thriving trade with New Ross, the manufacture, wool endorsed by the Butler family. Mrs. Quiglet is mentioned. This is an important observation or important piece of information for Thomond, who, if he read this, the Butler family were down buying the wool in the area. And James, Duke of Ormond, held the sort of estate at the time. So that was a big kudo, and that would have gone down very well with Thomond after reading this news, if you didn't know about it already. The linen industry, female-driven competition is mentioned, won by the Ure sisters of 1681. He also mentions wig making as well as a female barber. The people, there's across the entire manuscript, there's names of about 80 people. Majority of them, I believe he met, others he was told about, but I believe he stayed in Carlow for a significant period of time. So from reading the account of Carlow, he met the people, not all of them, obviously Sir John Temple had gone, but he met the people who were there at the time. And obviously Oliver Keating, he was deceased, but he met his wife and the lady who showed him the pearls. But he just get the feeling that he really knew the family, the people that he met. Elsewhere in the journal, towards the end, Dingley has a whole section on the observations of the customs of Ireland. And within these, there are 2 relation to Carlow, which I thought were interesting. I don't know what they mean, but it's obviously something he had noticed when he was here. But the interesting one about the second one about the servants doing the curtsy to each other, I do wonder, has that something to do with the fire and maybe some folklore concerning fire and ashes? Is there something to do with the curtsy, the fact that they're removing them? Is it sort of a well-wishing thing? I don't know, but I just thought it was very interesting when I read it, and maybe some of you might have some idea about it. Staplestown. This is anytime I've read about Staplestown, and people, I think there's a general consensus that Dingley based himself here, and he perhaps used this as a base to visit places like Kilkenny, maybe parts of Tipperary, and given the sketch of the town and the knowledge of its inhabitants, you just get the feeling it's like home from home. It's unique in that it captures a small town of the period, and its inhabitants, as well as their professions. And this is made even more important, the fact that it no longer exists. So to add to the list of the people that he mentions, you have all these people here as well. You have obviously Mr. Moore, the minister who he spoke to at the river, Robert Lackey Miller, Thomas Harris, sadly, our innkeeper of the town. I wonder if he's a relation of mine. Thomas Gillespie, the tailor and victualler, Thomas Gold, farrier, Joseph Davis, gardener, and Hugh Carpenter, a mason. Now, this is Donogh O'Brien, 4th Earl of Thomond, and he was born in Ireland but was educated in England and actively attended court. He became anglicised and most certainly Protestant. When he returned to Ireland, he updated his properties with contemporary or any of Thomond O'Brien properties with English architectural features such as Bunratty Castle and Carlow. Donogh, in his will, also left instructions for his tomb, which was to be made similar to that of the De Vere tomb in Westminster Abbey. This didn't happen, and he got one that resembled the Boyle tomb in Youghal. And this is it here, because Cork was early Cork was one of the overseers of his will. But I've put this slide up here because this is Dingley's sketch of the Thomond tomb, but he doesn't put it into his Irish journal. He has it in his Welsh journal. It's because of the marriage of Thomond O'Brien with the family, the family that he was doing the Welsh tour for. But just to give you an idea of Dingley and his descriptions around his, I know it's not very clear here, but I can send it on if any of you are interested in looking at it in better detail, that I believe that when he was doing sketches, he did little descriptions beside it in order to give him, as a memory, a prompt for when he was back in England, if he had to draw it again or improve on what he did. Now, this is this is Carlow Castle. This is a sketch which a lot of people have queried whether or not it is Carlow Castle. What I will say is that in Thomond's will of 60, this is Donogh O'Brien, in Thomond's will of 1617, he mentions, together with my household stuff at Carlow. So this suggests that he was resident here at some stage. So obviously at household stuff. I've spoken to a few people, Martin Dalton, who's done some work on the castle in recent times, as well as Ben Murtagh, about this sketch. And they have more or less agreed that there is an extension that was possibly originally done by Donogh and then perhaps refurbished later on in the 17th century. There's the dormer windows are similar to other buildings that Dingley sketches, so they may date to the slightly later period, maybe the 1670s. But there's another sketch by Austin Cooper of 1782, and you can see that he has captured it there. So it's obviously there. Part of the and the fact that the explosion has done away with it, so it's very difficult to kind of, well, we don't know, but you only go with the fact that Austin Cooper sketched it, and as did Dingley, and then there's another sketch by Charles Banks which also shows it, but I don't know how accurate this sketch is, but I found it in Lord Walter Fitzgerald's account of the castle. So it could well be, as I said, there's two showing it. So I believe that it probably is part of the thing. And when I was up to the castle last year, saw the remains of this window here, and Martin and Ben were there, and both of them said there was possibly likely the remains of whatever extension. But as I said, we don't know. But they were certainly interested when they saw it. The next sketch of the castle, this is, I was reading Hugh Clifton's paper in your journal of 1962, and he takes issue with the ridge of the roof. Dingley's sketch shows it running east-west and not north-south. And this is, whereas it is correct in the other sketch, this is an error, and Dingley makes this error in other sketches in his journal, or in the journal. For example, the sketch of Clonroad, which was another O'Brien building which no longer exists, where he confuses east and west. And this is Brian O'Dowlig, who'd done some work on it, spotted this. There's also an issue with the number of stories, and the stories of the castle. And again, I'm aware that people have spoken about this. But this also happens in his sketch of the Boucher Castle at Lough Gur. But this, unfortunately, with that, it cannot be substantiated due to later restoration. So they don't know whether or not there was more stories, but this certainly is the case for Carlow Castle. They don't know whether or not he made an error with the number of stories. It's general agreement the tall chimneys were there. So whether or not they date from the later from what period, from the later 16th century or the early 17th century, they don't know. Dingley also sketches Clogretton, which was owned by the Earl of Arran and tenanted by Sir John Carlow. This is situated on the Fushog River, where it meets the Barrow. The castle belonged to Sir Edmund Butler and was rebuilt after the siege by Sir Peter Carew. Dingley's sketch shows 5 floors with large bay windows in the centre of front 3 decorative gables, with crenellated parapeted sides and 2 tall chimney stacks. Unfortunately, we don't know when this building dates from, or because it unfortunately has over the years it has slowly disappeared, and I think there's not much left of it now. But again, it's unfortunate. We have no other sketches or no other evidence to show when the actual building dates from. Ballynunnery is another building sketched by Dingley. It was the home of Mrs. Anne Keating, widow of Oliver Keating, and this lady showed Dingley his river pearls, and this was recently mentioned in your journal from 2022. Very interesting article. Ballynunnery was part of the Arran estate, and Dingley describes its location having good gardens, and he includes it in his sketch. And I think the whole feeling is that it's open and it's peacetime Ireland, and these Martin Dalton says that these are probably just added in as a decorative thing. He doesn't believe that they were actually probably part of the actual building, because Dingley tends to finish off some of his sketches with a bit of a flourish, which is actually nothing to do with what was here. The site was in ruins by 1870, and it was reduced to a stump of a tower, and it was without buildings in 1930, and nothing today remains at ground level. Something similar happens with Tullow Castle. Again, only I think a wall survives now. But again, you know, the fact is we are left with no other comparative sketches. People automatically, I think, because they have nothing to compare to, they doubt what Dingley has sketched. But I think overall, they are believable, albeit with a few errors here and there, but not enough to completely dismiss him. While he's in Tullow, he sketches this tomb. The Burn tomb. Again, interesting recording, because he records the name of the mason who made it, and this other tomb was recorded by his dead. Might have been made by the same mason. It's a similar date, but I just use that, put that in for comparative purposes. Dingley went on to do do a tour of Wales, and one of the main reasons I think this was facilitated by Thomond was because of the marriage between Lady Henrietta Somerset and Henry Horatio, and maybe by this stage the Dingley's manuscript wasn't going to be sent to Thomond. Now, there was a number of reasons why this may not have happened. I've checked the Petworth archives and it's not there. There's another area which might be worth looking to see was a copy sent, and that's Joseph Williamson. His papers are all around a few different places in England. But the reason why maybe Dingley didn't receive payment was because that spate was dismissed for fraud post 1684. The Thomond family also suffered another death when the 7th Earl's grandson from his first marriage drowned in the sinking of the Gloucester ship in 1682. That's the ship that was bringing James II on a voyage down to up to Scotland, I think, and it sank, and he was one of the casualties. So by 1684, Dingley was engaged by the Duke of Beaufort on a journey around Wales, and this time he made his journey with his patron. But as I said, he gave the copy of his manuscript to Beaufort, and it's in Badminton Hall. Dingley died in 1695, and his niece was the recipient of his property in his will. His manuscripts appear to have been deposited in the Winnington Library at Sandford in Thames in Hereford. One of the well-known Winningtons at the time was Sir Francis, Solicitor General for Charles II. Dingley is recorded to have been a witness to a document he signed, so the two of them knew each other. Overall, we have very little or no information about Dingley apart from what he mentions in his writings, which isn't much to go on. However, the Folger MS, which I referred to you earlier on, a couple of pages were sent to me, and this has a poem written about Dingley by Martin Johnson, who was Vicar of Dilwyn, where Dingley lived when he wasn't travelling around. And as you will see from the final stanza, I think you're probably better off reading the transcribed piece. You can see that he was known for his sketches. Thank you very much.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much. We'd like to open the floor now to any questions.
I was wondering, could you elaborate a bit more on about the way the Christian whole celebrated St. Patrick's Day differently? What was it at that stage?
Well, it looks as if, I mean, the people who could wear, say, hats and have ribbons, they went around celebrating it that way. And then those that couldn't afford to buy those, and there would have been probably a large amount of the population, the workers, they were given, as I said, the money to go off and by whoever they worked for, to go and buy whatever, as they say, drink. Some things haven't changed, but you have the one thing that Dingley does mention a lot, he uses he calls them the vulgar, but the poor in Irish society, and he refers to them quite a lot in the journal, which you would have seen them, but it's people wouldn't have been able to afford things like ribbon and hats, and there was obviously the ones produced for the day that was in it. St. Patrick's Day was celebrated. I know from the was it from the, well, I certainly know in England, Irish troops used to celebrate it. And it's a record of that earlier on. But the thing is, we're in the notion now today of being able to buy things. But back then, those that could afford could buy things. They knew that at that stage, the age of 17, there would have been celebration it, definitely. And there would have been markets and things like that. So, but not everyone could afford to do that. So you'd have the other people who were working say, can you give me the money to go out and celebrate it? You know, so it's something that I don't think anybody really, I hear it, well, not every year, but every now and again you hear Dingley's description of celebration Patrick's Day, but no one talks about the two different ways the people could put on their hat, you know, the ribbons or whatever, and those that are looking for extra bit, you know, the tip or whatever, you know, being the day that's in it, you know.
Were they parading around that day?
I don't know. I don't know if there were parades or not, but there was certainly, you know, celebrations and whatever. Yeah, I would think so. Yeah.
Amy, just in relation, say, to the stuff around to Carlow Castle and to Tullow Castle, how accurate are Dingley's sketches of some of the, I suppose, the more important buildings in Ireland, the big cathedrals that are still there, and we can sort of compare Dingley's work with that and sort of the validate what he did at Carlow Castle?
I'm speaking to a few people who've used them as sources, and they think that the sketch for, say, St. Patrick's Cathedral, they generally consistent there. They like that, but the one for Christchurch Cathedral, the few people have said about some of the buildings that he has the perspective wrong. You know, but then again, you know, yes, and then you look at somebody like Francis Place, who was he was far superior. He was a sketch, you know, extraordinaire. You know, you can't compare himself. Dingley was a jobbing person who got good, and if he had time, he could really do a good job. If you look at his the French journal, which is online with the Irish one, they often say that's better. But then again, what he was sketching in France was probably superior stuff, buildings, I think. Maybe I shouldn't say that for the Irish stuff, but it has been said to me, you know, oh, his French one's much better. Yeah, I don't know. But I'd certainly encourage you all to go online and have a look at the original manuscript on the National Library, because it's you've all your device now, you can bring it up and small, you know, and if you read it and get used to it, you'll get, you know, you can read through it, and it's great to be able to look at the original and look at the original sketches as well. Probably didn't do it much justice tonight, but to actually see it online, it's lovely.
Two questions for you. First of all, spelling of his name. I've seen it spelled Dineley and Dinelly.
Okay. Strange enough, I was going to have a slide about that, and I thought I'd be pushing it a bit, showing his name. I'll tell you, his family name is Dingley, Dingley. Okay, and I've looked at wills, so, and it's also down as Dingler, Dingley. Now, you're right, he does spell it the other way, Dineley. Maybe he wanted to spell it that way, but if you go through the amount of times he spelled or signs his name, it's more the Ding rather than Dineley. There was another family who were like the Hoptons who lived in Worcester, and they were Dinleys. And he actually went up and visited them and sketched their tombs. But they were two separate families. That's one of the things I did actually look at. There's families here, families there. They're not related, and their spelling of their name is different. So he is Dingley, and he spells it most at that time, or most that way, and the wills show it that way as well.
My other question, the National Library website,
Mm-hmm.
can you download those or screenshot those, and are they copyright?
You can't download anything from the National Library website. However, if you go onto the other website I showed you, you can actually download the illustrations from that. Yeah, and you have all the illustrations. I think they're out of copyright now, but anytime I do use them, I just mention the National Library in case they come on to me, but that's the way I do it anyway.
Any further questions?
It's not a question, but Cloughennon Castle or Cloughennon House, I salvaged a house which was just across the river from Cloughennon, and it contained much earlier material. It was Queen Anne, but it contained stuff which was much earlier than the house. It was built from, salvaged from.
Oh, that's interesting. That does happen actually. Thanks for that piece of information.
It was called Christie.
Okay. Thanks for that piece of information.
The other side of the river.
Okay. Yeah, that as you probably know often happens. They take down and they reuse it and think, well, that's interesting. Thanks very much for that piece of information.
Do you know where the effigy, the O'Brien effigy in Carlow graveyard, where it was? Is there anything saying where it actually was?
No, he just says it's in the graveyard. In the churchyard. In the church, I think it's St. Column's. Yeah, Columkill, yeah. Yeah, Columbus, sorry. Yes, sorry.
I've looked for it.
Yeah, I remember the time I did make a few inquiries and no, there wasn't any sign of it. I had a look and I think I asked a few people at the time. But as what happens, things disappear, you know.
Further questions? No. It was fantastic. I think for all of us, I think certainly for myself anyway, we often think about researching the written word. You know, we focus primarily on that. And I think to look at illustration too, it's really, really good way of doing it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Could I call on John to give the most thanks, please?
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks everybody for coming along. What a great talk, going from the death warrant of Charles I to witchcraft to Washington, the Folger Library in Washington is great. Ramble through time as well. A few things struck me when you showed the genealogy. It just shows the damage that was done here in the 1920s. And the UK are just so lucky, especially I suppose if you're a high status family, to be able to actually trace your genealogy. I was very interested in Thomas Sprate. I'm not sure whether it was the father or the son, but Sprate's survey is a really important document of early modern Carlow, naming the people, what they were doing, and where they lived. So I think that's really important. And of course, there's in Petworth House there is mention of a map, which then would be the earliest sort of map of Carlow town, but it's missing at the moment. It hasn't been found. But Petworth, I understand, is a little bit chaotic, and there's lots of papers over there that have never been really looked at. So sometimes that might come out. I'm always interested in the Valley. Where did he come from? He before the Huguenot.
Yeah, he was a Cromwellian soldier.
Yeah.
And been reading up a little about him. He's one of the 49 officers.
Right.
And yeah, he there was quite a few Cromwellians that Dingley bumped into when he was over here, and I often wonder how he saw them being a royalist himself.
That's really interesting. Glad to hear that. That's great. And just look at it, Staplestown. Obviously, it's an amazing, and I'd never seen until I was actually doing the PR for this the map of Staplestown with the writing in it. I've never seen that before. I'd encourage anybody to look at that.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah. So look at Amy. Thanks very much for coming to Carlow and really enlightening us. I know you've been down before. And we've had conversations before, but I think Dingley is probably a really important chronicler of Carlow, and you really did him justice and his work justice tonight. So on behalf of Carlow Archaeological and Historical Society, I'd like to move vote. Thanks.
Thank you.
On behalf of the society, this is like Dingley. This is the Gala Hutton print, so it's more abstract than accurate, but it takes in all of Carlow town.
Oh,
and all the
listen,
things.
thank
So,
you very much. Oh,
thanks very much.
thank you. That's lovely. Thank you. That's lovely. Oh, thank you.
You might come back when you publish the book.
Oh, I will. Well, I will. And definitely, I was just saying earlier on, I've been working on it for a long time. I transcribed the entire manuscript, and I said, I did it, and I sat there and I went, now, what's this all about? And what I've said to you tonight, it's what I've discovered, and now I have to work on getting it out there for people to enjoy it. And it's not going to be like the Royal Society of Antiquaries that all their footnotes took over. The Irish Manuscripts Commission want really short notes. So you'll see the manuscript in a nice readable form, and you can make up your own mind then what you think of it. But I think it's definitely needed a new edition, more modern one, and all the illustrations will be in it. A lot of people think, oh, you're not going to put the illustrations, they'll all be in it. Well, thanks very much for coming along tonight. We appreciate it. Thank you. It's lovely.
Just a little bit of housekeeping to finish up. So we have the current and former Carlow journals.
Yeah.
If anyone's interested in purchasing them, we also have a membership fund if anyone would like to join the society. You're all welcome. And we have a donation box. So if anyone would like to do anything tonight. To finish up this year, we have 2 lectures left. We have the first one in October. It's on the Valley Road Castle Research Project. That's myself doing that. And November, that will be